The scream ripped from the hallway mirror, before Emily felt her lungs catch, and the sound clawed the air like broken glass. Emily said, "I didn't move," as her reflection lifted a slow, deliberate hand to wave. She stood locked, every muscle clenched, while rain hammered the window like knuckles. Emily said, "Stop it." But the glass self smiled, a half-second too late. The room smelled of wet dust and cold metal, a night built for bad decisions. Emily said, "This isn't happening," and her reflection mouthed words that didn't match. The hallway bulb hummed, threatening to die. Emily said, "Who are you?" and the mirror face blinked without her. Thunder rolled, and the mirror caught a white vein of lightning that split her in two. Emily said, "Move, and I'll know," then froze, and the reflection waved again, cheerful as a lie. The scream still rang in Emily's skull like a fire alarm that refused to die. Emily said, "It's a trick," while the mirror sat smug and ordinary. The rain made a metronome on the sill, every beat a dare. Emily said, "Wave again," and kept her arms pinned tight. The reflection twitched a finger in greeting, a child's prank with a predator's patience. Emily said, "You're not me," tasting metal. Her phone flashed, missed calls that she did not remember. Emily said, "If I blink, you blink, then blinked once and watched the glass blink twice." The hallway smelled older than the building. Emily said, "I'm not afraid," and felt the lie gather heat. Emily counted to 10 like a hostage negotiator with herself, each number a sandbag against panic. Emily said, "Move your left hand," and never twitched. The reflection raised its right. She tried a smile that looked like a grimace. Emily said, "I'll call someone," and the phone buzzed as if it heard. The glass face leaned closer, though she hadn't moved an inch. Emily said, "What do you want?" and the mouth shaped a word she could not hear. A draft slid under the door, cold as a wrist. Emily said, "You're not real," and the mirror fogged with a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The storm rolled a fresh growl through the building, and the bulb answered with a sick pulse. Emily said, "Enough," and reached for a throw blanket to cover the frame. The reflection brightened like a stage light ignored the room. Emily said, "Stay down," as she pinned the fabric, but the covered glass bulged with a ripple. Her breath went shallow, measured like counting pills. Emily said, "If I can't see you, you can't see me," and the blanket twitched as if a face pressed from the other side. A nail squealed in the wall. Emily said, "Back off," and the plaster hairline cracked. She grabbed her phone and set it to record, because proof felt safer than prayer. Emily said, "Do it now," and stood like a statue. The reflection waved with delighted confidence. She watched the screen show the wave before her eyes saw it, like time tilting. Emily said, "Why are you ahead of me?" and the glass copied a laugh without sound. The building settled with a thud that felt aimed. Emily said, "I'm ending this," though her knees shook. The mirror face smiled wider than the hinges of a jaw should allow. Emily said, "Don't," and the bulb finally went dark. Emily sat on the couch, wrapped in a quilt that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent, her breath shallow and uneven. Emily said, "It was only glass," but the words felt like an excuse. The rain had slowed, leaving the house silent except for the creaks of restless wood. Her phone buzzed again, but she let it ring, afraid of hearing only static. Emily said, "Tomorrow it will be gone," though the mirror was still just a room away. She pulled her knees close, remembering nights when loneliness was the scariest thing she knew. Emily said, "I wish someone was here," but the apartment stayed mute. The quilt felt like armor she couldn't trust, and the thought of sleep seemed impossible. Emily said, "I'll stay awake," knowing exhaustion would betray her. She scrolled through old photos, faces frozen in better years, and the silence pressed harder. Emily said, "I used to laugh with you," tracing her thumb over a blurred smile in the phone's glow. The room smelled faintly of dust and candle wax. A floorboard popped, and she jumped. Emily said, "Just the house settling," but her eyes flicked toward the hallway where the mirror slept. Her chest tightened as though the glass might hear. Emily said, "Don't be weak," though her throat wavered. The clock ticked loud enough to mimic footsteps, cruel and steady. Emily said, "I'll call tomorrow," but knew she wouldn't. The loneliness curled around her ribs like wire. She reached for the untouched mug of tea, now cold, and the ceramic clink echoed too loudly. Emily said, "You need sleep," though her body fought it. The rain had stopped, but the glass still felt alive. She pictured the reflection waving in the dark, waiting. Emily said, "If I cover it, it ends," though she knew it had not. The quiet became unbearable. Emily said, "I'll just check," though her chest screamed no. Her bare feet pressed against the rug, and every fiber dragged like a warning. Emily said one glance, standing slow, but her shadow stretched too far down the hallway. The apartment felt smaller, as if the walls had leaned closer. Her fingers brushed the hallway wall for balance, cool paint biting her skin. Emily said, "I'm stronger than glass," as if practice might make it true. The shadows pulsed with each flicker of the bulb. Her heartbeat grew louder than her thoughts. Emily said, "No more games," though her knees trembled. She stopped halfway down the hallway, the mirror looming like a wound waiting to split open. Emily said, "You don't own me," and her voice cracked. The silence answered with a hum from the bulb, cruelly steady. Emily said, "I'll smash you," and for the first time believed she might. But the weight of the dark pressed, daring her to reach. She forced herself forward, pulse slamming in her temples. Emily said, "You're nothing," her whisper brittle as glass. The mirror came into full view, smooth, innocent, a predator playing dead. Her reflection stood waiting, face calm, body perfectly matched. Emily said, "Not this time," but the glass version tilted its head, breaking the symmetry. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. Emily said, "Go on, mock me," but the reflection only smiled, slow and patient. The quiet grew unbearable, like a scream trapped behind walls. Emily said, "I hate you," and the reflection's lips moved too, but soundlessly late. Emily pressed her palm against the glass, her skin prickling with cold that bit deeper than the air around her. Emily said, "You're trapped, not me," but the reflection smirked like it had the upper hand. The bulb overhead flickered, and shadows seemed to lunge across the wall. Emily said, "I'm still in control," though her heart skipped painfully. The reflection moved a beat ahead, echoing her defiance before she even finished. Emily said, "Stop copying me," and the mirror self-mouthed words that weren't hers. The silence felt alive, every breath a negotiation with something unseen. Emily said, "You can't win," and the reflection tilted its head, smiling as though the game had only just begun. Her phone slipped from her pocket, clattering to the floor, and the sound felt like a gunshot in the silence. Emily said, "Damn it," crouching to grab it. The reflection crouched a second too soon, lips twisting with pleasure. Emily said, "You think you're clever," voice cracking like glass. The floor chilled her bare feet, each board groaning under her weight. Emily said, "I'm not scared," though her hands shook as she lifted the phone. The reflection stared with wide, mocking eyes, blinking twice for every one of hers. Emily said, "You're not me," her throat raw. The storm outside had gone, but the air still pressed heavy with static. The phone screen lit her face, a pale wash of false safety. Emily said, "I'll film you lifting it like a weapon." The reflection already had a phone raised, grinning as if mocking her. Emily said, "No, I'm first," breath shallow with dread. The glass self pressed its phone to its ear, whispering words Emily couldn't hear. Emily said, "Who are you talking to?" Panic sharp in her chest. A faint hum filled the hallway like distant wires heating. Emily said, "Don't play games," her jaw locked tight. The reflection laughed silently, the vibration of its voice felt in her bones instead of her ears. Emily said, "This isn't real," but she knew she was wrong. A vibration buzzed in her hand, her phone lit with an incoming call labeled unknown. Emily said, "No one has this number," whisper trembling like paper. The reflection raised its phone in sync with the ringing, grinning wider. Emily said, "Don't answer," but her thumb hovered. The call tone grew louder, pressing into her skull. Emily said, "Who is this?" almost begging. The reflection mouthed her own name, slow and deliberate, pointing at her chest. Emily said, "That's impossible," every nerve on fire. The phone vibrated so hard it slipped, landing face up. The call still rang, but the mirror showed the word answer already glowing. The phone went silent, but her reflection still held it to its ear, whispering. Emily said, "What are you saying?" voice strangled with terror. The glass self's eyes glowed faint with lightning residue, lips curling into words she couldn't hear. Emily said, "Speak louder," stepping closer. The reflection's smile widened until it felt inhuman. Emily said, "You're not me," her body trembling. The mirror self leaned forward until its nose almost pressed against the glass. Emily said, "Stay back," retreating, her chest pounding. The bulb overhead popped, plunging the hallway into darkness. She heard breathing, but not her own. Emily staggered, her knees buckling as the dark swallowed the hallway. The silence wasn't silence at all. It pressed on her chest, alive and waiting. Emily said, "You're feeding on me," her voice jagged, barely her own. The reflection tilted its head, smiling with the patience of a predator savoring prey. Emily said, "Why me?" but the words had no weight. A memory clawed loose, her grandmother's hushed warnings, never cover that mirror, never move it, never stare too long. Emily said, "This was yours," the syllables breaking on her tongue. The reflection's smile widened, knowing she'd finally remembered. The plaster above the frame cracked, a jagged vein crawling toward the ceiling. Emily said, "You've always been here," her gut twisting, the thought heavier than steel. The mirror glowed faintly from within, pulsing like breath. Emily said, "I woke you," and the glass rippled as if water had replaced it. Her phone lit in her hand, screen scrolling without her touch. Images flickered in rapid blur, a slideshow too fast to grasp. Emily said, "Stop it," clutching the device like it might shatter. The reflection mirrored her, pulling a phone from nowhere, screen still and sharp. On its glow was an image of Emily as a little girl, missing teeth, smiling at a birthday cake. Emily said, "That's not possible," panic slicing her tone. Memories she'd buried under years of exhaustion, now resurfaced like blood in water. Emily said, "You shouldn't know that," her voice trembling, throat raw. The reflection mouthed slowly, "I do." The air buzzed with static pressure thick enough to rattle her jaw. Emily said, "You've been watching me," her breath quick and shallow. The glass vibrated with low humming, almost a chant. Emily said, "What do you want?" desperate for any answer. The reflection raised a finger to its lips, shushing her into silence. The floor groaned beneath her like a warning. Emily said, "You're tied to this place," her whisper hollow. The reflection nodded slowly, lips curving into a smirk that wasn't hers. Emily said, "Someone brought you here," voice breaking as she searched the shadows. Behind the glass, faint shapes twisted, shadows of figures, blurry, writhing, trapped like insects in amber. Emily said, "No, I didn't," shaking her head, denial clinging hard. The reflection mouthed, "You did," every syllable sharp though silent. Her breath turned ragged, each inhale a knife in her lungs. Emily said, "I never touched it," though her body screamed memory she couldn't face. The mirror pulsed faintly, glowing red at its center like a heart, thumping to her own racing beat. Emily said, "You're lying," but bile rose in her throat as dread settled that it wasn't a lie at all. She stumbled backward toward the living room, each step heavy as if the air turned to tar. Emily said, "You were waiting for me," breath rattling in her throat. The reflection mirrored her but faster, leaning forward eagerly. Emily said, "I'll smash you," forcing the threat out, but it landed empty. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, an unnatural palm pressing from the inside out. Emily said, "Stay inside," voice sharp with panic. The glass creaked, tiny lines branching outward with each push. A cold draft swept the apartment, slamming a door in the kitchen. Emily said, "This isn't my fault," but guilt stung her chest like poison. The reflection bared too many teeth, its grin stretched past human limits. Emily said, "You want out," her whisper almost broken. The mirror shuddered violently, fractures spreading like veins of ice. A sharp crack split through the frame, the mirror's corner bursting like a scream held too long. Emily said no, clutching her head as though she could hold reality together. The reflection shoved harder, its palms stretching the fractures wider. Emily said, "You're not me," voice shrill with desperation. Lightning flashed outside, bleaching the world into skeletal white for a heartbeat. The reflection mouthed, "I am you," venomous certainty etched into every motion. Emily said, "You're a lie," but her voice cracked, disbelief collapsing into fear. The mirror webbed with fractures, glass trembling violently, shards ready to fall. Emily said, "You can't leave," her body shuddering against the floorboards. But the reflection's grin deepened, promising it already had. Emily said, "Please," voice broken, trembling, and the mirror pulsed alive, heartbeat in the glass stronger than her own. The crack in the mirror pulsed like a wound, leaking light that bled into the hallway. Emily said, "What are you?" voice hoarse, as though her throat had been scraped raw. The reflection pressed its palms to the fractured glass, lips curling into words that her ears refused to hear. Emily said, "Say it," daring herself, though her legs trembled. The mirror shimmered, and her reflection's eyes shifted. No longer her shade of hazel, but coal-black pits. Emily said, "You're not me," her whisper rising into panic. The reflection mouthed, "I'm the real one." Emily stumbled back, hitting the wall hard enough to rattle frames. Emily said, "Liar," though tears burned hot down her cheeks. The mirror laughed silently, each fracture spreading wider like veins across ice. Emily said, "You're nothing but glass," though fear told her she was wrong. Her phone vibrated violently, screen flashing with her own number as the caller. Emily said, "That's not possible," chest rising with ragged breaths. The reflection raised its phone too, already connected, lips moving in sync with her own name. Emily said, "You can't know me," voice almost breaking. The air tasted like copper, each inhale sharp and metallic. Emily said, "Stop it," gripping her phone, but the screen showed her reflection staring back instead of her camera. Emily's heart pounded so hard it blurred her vision. Emily said, "I don't believe you," but the reflection mouthed, "You always did." She wanted to throw the phone, but her hands locked, as though it was glued to her skin. Emily said, "I never wanted this," her voice small, almost a child's. The reflection smiled wider, as if feeding on her denial. The storm outside returned, thunder shaking the building, as if the world itself warned her. Emily said, "I won't let you in," her words louder now, almost convincing. The reflection leaned closer, pressing its forehead against the cracked glass. Emily said, "Stay away," stepping backward, her heel nearly missing the rug. The fractures glowed brighter, spreading like fire in veins. Emily said, "This isn't real," though her hands shook violently. The mirror self-mouthed, "This is all real," eyes unblinking. Emily wanted to scream, but no sound came. The house seemed to swallow her voice. Emily said, "You're trapped," but the reflection smiled, its mouth stretching too wide, teeth too sharp. Her body shivered under an invisible weight. Emily said, "You can't cross," even as the cracks deepened. She bolted into the living room, heart slamming, lungs clawing for air. Emily said, "You can't follow me," but the mirror's glow spilled into the room like water flooding in. Her reflection moved inside the glass, but faster, each gesture ahead of her. Emily said, "You're not me," her throat raw from shouting. The reflection laughed silently, hands pounding against glass as fractures spread. Emily said, "This house isn't yours," clinging to the armrest of the couch. Her body trembled, every nerve alive. Emily said, "I'll end you," voice full of desperation. The reflection mimicked the words, but mouthed them first, as though writing the script for her. Emily said, I'm not afraid, tears betraying her claim. The mirror quaked in its frame, ready to give. The mirror cracked again, shards falling like icy rain to the wooden floor. Emily said, "Don't come through," her voice trembling but defiant. The reflection crouched inside, its body twisting into sharp, unnatural angles. Emily said, "Stay back," clutching a broken frame from the table like a weapon. The glass pulsed, the cracks glowing brighter, every shard trembling. Emily said, "You won't win," though her voice trembled. The reflection mouthed, "You've already lost." Lightning flashed again, and for one moment the reflection wasn't her. Its face shifted, a blur of many faces, all screaming. Emily screamed too, the sound tearing out of her. Emily said, "I'm not yours." But the mirror answered with a violent shudder, as though it was about to break open. The mirror screamed without sound, a vibration rattling the walls and floorboards like an earthquake. Emily said, "I won't let you out," her voice shredded raw. The reflection's grin stretched until it split across fractured glass. Emily said, "You're nothing," clutching the broken frame tighter. Shards rained, slicing the air, one grazing her arm. Emily said, "This ends now," though her blood streaked the wood. The reflection leaned forward, palms pushing the frame outward as if it were elastic. Emily said, "You can't win," though terror trembled her lips. The glass pulsed with light, throwing shadows like fire. Emily said, "You're mine," and lunged at the mirror. The reflection lunged too, only faster, like a predator unchained. Emily swung the broken frame against the glass, the sound splintering like bone. Emily said, "Break," with all her strength. The mirror shrieked, light pouring out like molten fire. The reflection didn't shatter, it grabbed the frame, holding it from inside. Emily said, "Let go," but her arms shook as the pull dragged her closer. The air grew dense, thick as syrup, pulling her into the glass. Emily said, "I won't go," heels digging into floorboards. The reflection mouthed, "You're already in," eyes glowing brighter. Emily's throat burned, her scream stolen by the glass. Emily said, "You'll never have me," yanking with wild desperation. The mirror webbed with cracks, sparks of light shooting like veins into the walls. The house shook as the storm slammed, thunder drowning her heartbeat. Emily said, "I'm stronger than you," her voice breaking with rage. The reflection tilted its head, mouthing, "Prove it." Emily shoved forward, forcing her weight against the glass, shards biting her palms. Emily said, "I'll burn you," even as her blood smeared red on fractured silver. The mirror glowed hotter, like a furnace waiting to swallow. Emily said, "You're not real," though her body screamed otherwise. The reflection laughed, eyes flashing black. Emily said, "Die," slamming the frame into the glass again. Sparks exploded, wood splintering, shards exploding outward. Emily staggered, cut and shaking. Emily said, "I'll never let you take me," her voice raw and unrelenting. Shards rained down like razors, cutting her skin, each drop of blood joining the cracks. Emily said, "This is my house," though her voice wavered. The reflection bared jagged teeth, its face stretched longer than human. Emily said, "You're nothing but shadows," forcing herself upright. The mirror rippled violently, pulling her forward with invisible strings. Emily said, "Let me go," straining every muscle. The reflection mimicked her scream, only louder, vibrating the walls. Emily said, "You won't win," gripping a shard like a knife. Her reflection mirrored her grip, but raised its blade first. Emily said, "Not this time," and stabbed toward the glass. The mirror shrieked, a screech of ripping air as light burst outward. The shard pierced, plunging into the mirror's glow, light blasting like a flare. Emily said, "Break," screaming louder than the storm. The reflection convulsed, its grin tearing into rage, eyes flashing white. Emily said, "Go back," voice wild, her arms shaking violently. The glass cracked from center to edge, exploding into a web of fractures. Emily said, "You're not me," every syllable thunderous. The reflection mouthed, "I am," but its voice faltered in silence. Emily pressed harder, every wound screaming, her body shaking, as if breaking apart too. Emily said, "I'm still here," as the mirror shattered, shards bursting into the air like glass rain. The reflection's face split into fragments, each piece twisting before vanishing into dark. The hallway lay drowned in silence, glass scattered like frozen rain across the floor. Emily said, "It's done," her voice hoarse, but the words carried no weight. Her body trembled, blood dripping from shallow cuts like crimson constellations. Emily said, "You're gone," though her chest refused to unclench. The storm outside slowed to a drizzle, faint taps against the window like fingers too tired to knock. Emily said, "I'm free," though the thought rang hollow in her head. The shattered mirror's frame still pulsed faintly, a dying heartbeat refusing to quit. Emily said, "You can't come back," pressing a hand to her chest. The glass shimmered once, faintly, as though mocking her. Emily staggered into the living room, each step crunching over shards that echoed too loudly. Emily said, "It's over," but the echo of her own words didn't comfort. The couch sat as it always had, cushions slouched, blanket half folded, mocking her attempt at normalcy. Emily said, "I survived," clutching her bleeding hand with trembling fingers. Her chest heaved, sweat soaking her undershirt. Emily said, "It can't hurt me anymore," though the reflection of the lightning in the window made her flinch. The storm thinned, leaving a quiet that felt heavier than noise. Emily said, "Just breathe," but the house breathed with her. She picked up her phone from the rug, the screen cracked but glowing faintly. Emily said, "Please work," her voice sharp with need. The contact list opened without touch, her name repeated down every line. Emily said, "No, not again," panic crawling up her throat. Her reflection was gone from the glass, but still alive in the screen. Emily said, "Stop it," shaking it violently, but the phone hummed with a voice that wasn't sound. Her chest tightened. Emily said, "You lost," but the device glowed brighter, mocking her victory. Lightning flickered once outside, and her screen lit with her reflection smiling. Emily dropped it, heart pounding, unable to breathe. The mirror frame still stood in the hallway, glassless, yet shadows swam across its surface like ripples of water. Emily said, "You can't have me," though her legs shook, refusing to move closer. The shadows bent, shaping into a face half-formed. Emily said, "I broke you," yet the silhouette smiled from the empty frame. The air grew colder, breath turning to fog in front of her lips. Emily said, "Stay gone," pressing her back against the couch. The shadow mouths still here. Emily said, "No," voice cracking into near sob. The house creaked around her as though listening. The frame pulsed once, faint but alive. Glass crunched beneath her as Emily stepped back, unable to look away. Emily said, "I'm not yours," her whisper barely audible. The shadow inside the frame curved its mouth upward, a smile stretched too wide. Emily said, "Stay in hell," though her pulse beat louder than thought. The shards around her feet began to hum, vibrating with unseen force. Emily said, "Don't," her voice breaking. The reflection appeared across every fragment, tiny faces all smiling in unison. Emily said, "Please," but the shadows mocked her, lips curling silently. Lightning cracked one last time, bleaching the room white. As the glow faded, her reflection inside the shards grinned cruelly, as if claiming victory.